طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So last time we covered analog and digital modulation techniques, including the FM and AM and PM, and also we talked about ASK and PSK, and we tried to derive the probability of error, at least for binary phase shift keying and quadrature phase shift keying. And we started talking about the frequency planning for wireless networks. So we talked about the 7-cell structure where we try to minimize the interference between the neighboring cells by using 7 different frequencies. And by having 7 different frequencies, we noticed that the frequency reuse is like here. Where is this? Yeah, here. So the frequency reuse is there, but the distance between the two cells that use the same frequency is too far, in which case the interference is minimum. There is also the 3-cell structure where we use only 3 different frequencies, and frequency reuse will be higher. So we use the same frequency more often in different cells. However, as we can see, the distance between the neighboring cells that use the same frequency now is shorter, which means that there might be some effect of interference between the cells on each other. So the interference management in this case will be more complicated. Another way of trying to limit the interference and increase the frequency reuse is to use what we call the sectorized antennas, or the sector-based cells. In that case, what we do here is that we try to use sectorized antenna, and these sectorized antenna are some type of directional antenna. So the radiation or the electromagnetic wave will be directed into certain direction, in which case we can logically divide the cell into 3 sectors. Okay, so this actually reduces the size of the cell, in which case we try to leverage again the advantages of small cell structure. Remember, we talked about small cell structure, and it's particularly useful when it comes to increasing the network capacity. So if we have very high user density, the sectorized configuration or the sectorized architecture can accommodate higher capacity for or higher throughput per user, okay, and large user density. And we achieve this using the sectorized antenna or the directional antenna, okay. So in that case, as we can see, the frequency reuse is much higher. So we use the same frequency in cells more often, and we leverage the directionality of the antenna to try to create some kind of spatial diversity or mitigate the interference using special multiplexing.
What is the H and J?
These are different frequencies, yes, different frequencies.
Each one of them, like H1, H2?
Yeah, these are different frequencies, yes. And sometimes, by the way, we can use some. I don't want to complicate things, but we can use multiple antennas as well, as we discussed before, for beamforming. So we create some kind of interference mitigation through beamforming. So we can control the gain or the parameters of some of these antennas to try to direct the radiation or direct the transmission towards certain direction, in which case we can reduce the interference on all the other parts of the network. Okay, here we're using spatial diversity to try to mitigate the interference. Okay, and frequency reuse is higher in that case. So we use the same frequency. We can use the same frequency over and over again, but in that case in one sector, not in one cell, in one sector which is part of the cell. طيب. Now, in 3D in particular, they came with the concept of cell breathing, and that came in 3G, as you remember, we talked about code division multiplexing, and we said that one of the issues for code division multiplexing was the near-far effect. And we said that even though we're using orthogonal codes, and orthogonal codes guarantees, interference-free environment, right? But if we're talking about near and far users, so the near users can, overwhelm or can starve the far users by having to use more transmission power. So even though, the codes guarantee some kind of orthogonality, which means no interference, however, because of the near-far effect, there can be some interference even between the transmission for individual users. In that case, what they do in 3G, and this is also valid, by the way, for even FDM as well, for frequency division multiplexing, is that they use the concept of cell breathing. And what this means is that I can essentially control the transmission power from the cell tower or from the base station tower, okay, in which case I can reduce the size of the cell or increase the size of the cell. So this is based on what? Based on the fact that we try to, again, mitigate the interference. One of the issues is that, as we said before, interference is frequency selective, right? So some of the neighboring cells, so I have like some neighboring cells here, okay? I have neighboring cells everywhere, right? So these neighboring cells, they might use different frequency, right? So in which case, the interference, okay, for the individual cells is based heavily on the frequency range used in that cell. And some of the cells might suffer from interference more than the other, right? So in order to mitigate the interference across all these cells, what we do is that we try to control the size of the cell. We reduce the size of the cell, and we increase the cell size for other cells. So this way, we can reduce the interference effect on a certain cell that we think interference effect is high, right? So what we do is that we reduce the cell size to try to reduce the interference effect. And for the cells with a lower effect on interference, we can increase the size of the cell. Another factor is to increase or decrease the user density as well. By increasing the user density, we can reduce the cell size in order to accommodate smaller number of users, in which case we can provide quality of service or we can provide throughput per user, which is reasonable. Otherwise, if we keep the cell in the same original size and the user density is very high, like we have, like 2 million users in one cell, the cell will not be able to serve all these users, right? So the only way is that we reduce the size of the cell, right? So on one hand, cell breathing can be used to control the interference. On the other hand, cell breathing can be used to control the capacity per cell, to account for the different user density for each cell. So cell breathing talks about the fact that you can reduce the size or increase the size of the cell based on mitigation for the interference and the user capacity per cell. واضحة كده؟ واضح? So this is the concept of cell breathing. It came with 3D, although it was actually valid as well even for 2D. Even for FDM, you can reduce the cell size. Although in FDM, we didn't talk about power adaptation, right? For CDM, we talked about power adaptation to address what? The near-far effect, بالظبط. So that's why it was used heavily in 3G. Although in 2G, we could do the same thing by lowering the transmission power, in that case, to address the difference in the user capacity or the user density per cell, right? But in both cases, it's valid, whether in CDM or FDM. واضح كده؟ طيب. For of course, when we talk about FDMA, the frequency reuse causes the fact that we have to split the spectrum the big spectrum. So we have a huge spectrum. Let's say we have 200 megahertz, or even like 2,000 megahertz or something as a full spectrum. So we divide that into smaller channels or different frequency ranges based on whether we use 7 frequency structure or 3 frequency structure. And then we can divide these 7 frequencies or 3 frequencies on the neighboring cells, right? So this is the concept of using FDM for interference mitigation across the different cells. However, in CDMA, we don't have to do that, right? Because we can mitigate the interference between the cells by controlling the codes, by assigning different orthogonal codes, right? So we can do that. So technically, we can use one frequency for the entire network, technically, right? And then assign different codes for each cell to mitigate the interference. Okay, so in that case, each of these cells is assigned a different code, which is represented by these rainbow colors. Okay. So, as we said before, what is the difference between CDM and FDM? We talked about the fact that usually in FDM, we divide the frequency ranges into small parts, whereas for orthogonal codes, we have very large domain of codes. So in that case, the management of these codes have higher flexibility, in which case the management is more flexible for the case of managing the codes. And this is an advantage for 3G. Of course, this comes with the cost of having to do power adaptation for mitigating the near-far effect. So that has to be there. ماشي? Okay. So these are this is the end of chapter 2. Okay. So again, in chapter 2, we focus on the physical layer, starting from talking about the history or the motivation behind the wireless communication in general, and we talked about different applications, and then we started talking about the wireless signal properties in different frequency ranges, starting from low frequency, and we talked about the relationship between the wavelength of the signal and the size of the antenna, and what's the implication of this in terms of designing different applications. Then we covered the analog and digital modulation and so on. In chapter 3, we mainly focus on multi-axis techniques. So similar to in physical layer, we talked about a frequency division multiplexing, right? Here we talk about, here we add the letter A. So we start to talk about FDMA, TDMA, and by MA here we mean a multi-axis. So in medium axis control or media axis techniques, what we talk about here, or the system model, if you will, talks about the fact that we have n nodes are sharing one shared medium, okay? And that's, of course, evident in the case of wireless, right? Because we have the air, which is shared technically by all nodes, right? So here we talk about n nodes are sharing a medium, and then we need to control who should send on what frequency and at a specific time in order to mitigate any kind of collision or something like this. Okay? Type. So why do we talk about media access particularly for wireless? Because of course in wireless we have very unique characteristics that we cannot just apply multi-access techniques for wired networks directly to wireless, and that's for many reasons. We talked about some of these reasons in Network 2 at least, but here we'll talk in more depth, and we'll try to also analyze and try to derive some mathematical equations that characterize the performance of some of these multi-access techniques. Okay. So in this chapter, we'll talk about the motivation, which is What I'm just saying that wireless requires special treatment, special handling when it comes to multi-access techniques, and that's mainly because of the fact that we cannot detect collision in wireless. We'll talk about why, and then we'll talk about collision-free multi-access techniques, where since we cannot detect collision, we try to eliminate it completely by having having to divide that channel, the shared channel, either in space or in frequency or in time. Okay. And then we will start to talk about that collision-based. And why do we have to have collision-based if we're talking about the fact that we cannot detect collision? We'll talk about this, and we'll talk about the motivation behind collision-based techniques. So then we'll cover Aloha, reservation schemes, and collision avoidance, and all these different techniques. Okay? So, so the question is, can we apply medium access techniques methods from wireless, from fixed networks or wired networks? Of course not. Why? Because for fixed networks, what we have is that we have a shared line, and we have many nodes connected to that shared line. This is the logical topology. Of course, you can represent that physically using different physical topologies, but here this is the logical topology. We can represent this using switches, using coaxial key, whatever. But this is the symbol. So we have n nodes sharing one medium. So this is for wired, right? So the idea here is that if a node sends, it sends with, let's say, a power of P transmit. Okay. So when you send with the power P transmit, this power will stay across this line and will probably not change its value at all, right? So if you try to sense from any of these nodes, chances are you will measure a power level of very close to P. So I can deterministically, okay, know that there is a node transmitting. So if the power level on the line is 0, this means no node transmitting. If the power level is P, one node is transmitting. If the power level is 2P or close to 2P, well, there is collision. So here in wired, things are deterministic. Yani there's no probability here.
What happens if it's the 3P now?
Collision برضو. 4P collision. Okay, I can have 4 nodes sending at the same time. For me, it doesn't matter. Anything above 2P or more is collision.
They don't know, like if they send at the same time, they don't know that our cell is sending at the same time.
I don't care. I don't care as long as there are 2 nodes or 3 nodes or 4 nodes sending. For me, this is collision because I cannot, assuming that of course they are sending on the same frequency at the same time, okay, or there is some kind of overlap, because here we're sending a frame or we're sending a large frame. So if there is any overlap between these frames, then at some point you will measure a power level of 2P, in which case, خلاص, for me this is collision. Both frames are wasted in that case. Okay. Type. What happens about if we remove this and we use the air? Okay. So in that case, it's not a guided line, right? And as we have discussed before, the transmitted wireless signal suffers attenuation in the shared air. Okay, so if you remove this, okay, let's remove it so that we don't. So if you remove this and we talk about in general n nodes, okay, they are trying to share the air, right? So here, technically, if you measure the power in different areas here, chances are it can take any value. I don't know, okay? So even if one node is transmitting, you might measure like P over 2 or P over 3, or which is close to the noise level. So you don't know, okay? So we cannot really use. I can sense to some extent that there is transmission happening if the power level is above the noise level. If it's above the noise level, then I can say there is somebody transmitting. But what if I measure a power of p? Does that mean there is one node sending or two nodes? I don't know. واضحة دي؟ So in that case, I cannot really detect collision deterministically. I cannot do this. Or at least I cannot guarantee that my classification of collision is free of any errors. واضح؟
Is there a noise listen? Do they listen to noise
Yes, remember we talked about three different ranges for the wireless transmission. We talked about transmission range and interference range and noise range. And
so sensing is used.
Of course, sensing is still used. Okay, so I can say that there is transmission happening, right? But I cannot guarantee that there is a collision happening. Okay, so if I see, like, what if I see that the power level is P? In all cases, I will abstain from transmission because there is something going on. I don't want to intervene, for sure. But can I say for sure that this is collision? I don't know. Okay, maybe one node is sending, maybe two nodes are sending. I don't know, right? So this undeterministic or probabilistic behavior in wireless makes it really prohibitive to detect collision. That's why in wireless we always use a collision avoidance, not collision detection. We cannot detect collision. Right. So here we cannot, as we said, we cannot use so we cannot use collision detection similar to wired. So what we do is that we use a collision avoidance. So that's why here IEEE 802.11 in that case we don't use collision detection. So signal strength decreases proportionally to the square of the distance, and that's what we talked about, in which case the sender would apply a carrier sensing and collision detection, but collision happens at the receiver. So in that case, by the way, this is a rule, collision always is happening at the receiver. So if I'm trying to transmit two signals, whether in wired or wireless, right? So if we want to detect collision, we detect that at the receiver, right? So it might be that so we will talk about the phenomena of hidden terminal problem and exposed terminal problem, which are exclusive in wireless. So if a node tries to send, sometimes another node cannot hear that. So for example, if this node is trying to send, then there is a transmission range, right? So this transmission range, if this node tries to send to this, and there is some transmission range, this node may not actually hear that, right? And that's a very big problem in wireless. And sometimes even carrier sensing will not help. There are so many scenarios where carrier sensing cannot actually help, because if I'm not in the transmission range or the interference range, I cannot even hear that there is transmission happening. What is the implication of this? This node may in fact try to also send to this node, right? Because it cannot hear that there is transmission happening, right? And if it tries to send, then collision will happen at the receiver. So even carrier sensing will not help you to try. So we say collision avoidance, but we cannot really avoid the collision in all cases. In fact, we'll talk about many cases where really carrier sensing will not help. Okay? Type. We call this a hidden terminal problem. We'll talk about this again. So in wireless, there are very common two scenarios where here in the hidden terminal problem, there is this is a very, very famous scenario where here node A tries to send to node B, right? Since node A tries to send to node B is in the transmission range, right? So node B can receive the transmission of A. However, node C tries to use carrier sensing, right? And it tries to use carrier sensing, and it figures out that there's nobody sending because the transmission of A is not heard by C, right? So in that case, C will send, and then the collision will happen at B, right? So this is called hidden terminal problem. So C is hidden. So because of the fact that C is hidden from the transmission that is going on between A and B, that caused the collision to happen, and carrier sensing did not help in that case. Another similar example, which carrier sensing, it doesn't actually cause collision in that case, but it wastes resources. And so if we imagine بقى, instead of this scenario that we have node A now is sending to node B, okay? So node A is sending to node B. So node C here, okay, is actually trying to send to node D, okay? So node C is in the interference range of the transmission of A, okay? So A is sending to B, and the signal is arriving to B normally, but there is another node C, okay, close to B, okay, which it hears the transmission in that case, okay? So node C is actually trying to send to D, okay? Will that, in fact, cause collision? Collision happens at the receiver.
At B.
Hmm?
At B. Collision will happen at B.
Right, and so in that case, the collision might happen at B if they are sending at the same time and C is sending at the same time. But imagine that if C is in the transmission range but not in the in the interference range but not in the transmission range of B. So it hears, okay, and if it sends, B will be in the interference range of C, okay, so there will be some interference, but the transmission can happen concurrently in that case, okay? But in that case, if C listens to any kind of interference, it will abstain from transmission in that case. It will abstain from the transmission, and in that case, it wastes the transmission opportunity, okay? So this is called the exposed terminal problem because of the fact that C is in the interference range between A and B. C will in fact be in the interference range, and it will abstain from transmitting to D, okay? Another scenario for the exposed terminal problem, which is يعني more clear بقى, if actually B is sending to A. If B is sending to A, right, then C will listen, صح? Will listen, clearly listen, and it will hear the transmission, okay? And if C tries to send to D, there will be no collision happening at all, صح? Because A and D are very far apart. واضح كده؟
But it will not send.
But C will not send. C will clearly not send, in which case we waste the opportunity of the transmission, okay? So there are many scenarios where, and this is different variations of the exposed terminal problem. So the fact that we have a transmission range and interference range, and the fact that the collision happens at the receiver makes it very, very tricky for any carrier sensing to avoid collision 100%. So there are many scenarios where the carrier sensing will not help. In some scenarios, the carrier sensing will actually cause the collision to happen, or at least will not avoid the collision from happening. In other cases, like the exposed terminal problem, the carrier sensing will force me to waste the opportunity for transmission.
But see, in this case, it's sensing the signal from the left.
From?
From the left. The transmission is from the right.
No, if B is transmitting to A.
Yeah, it will sense it from because it's left to sensing it from the left because.
يعني ايه sensing from the left؟ هو اصلا احنا we assume هنا that we use omnidirectional antenna. Okay? So if B is sending to A, then this is the transmission range. واضح؟ This is the transmission range now. So C will listen, will hear that there is transmission happening, and of course A will hear that. A is the receiver, so A will receive it. There's no issue. But because C will hear the same transmission, it will abstain from transmission completely. Even though C is trying to send to D, and D is on the other side, so if I try to send from C to D, the transmission range will be like this. صح? Okay? So in that case, even if B is in the transmission range, okay, the collision will happen at B because B is not the receiver. B is not a receiver أصلا. واضح؟ واضحة ولا مش واضحة؟
To some extent.
So here, the exposed terminal problem, it has different variations really. يعني the scenarios are really يعني plenty. But the exposed terminal problem, we have this scenario in many cases where it wastes the opportunity for the transmission. Carrier sensing wastes the opportunity for transmission. And this will actually lower the throughput. In hidden terminal problem, carrier sensing will not avoid having the collision.
So it's the first one where the collision happened, but the second one is just, it's not saying.
Yeah, we're not talking about collision here. Here we're talking about the fact that C should be able to send to D, but it will not. So in the exposed terminal problem, C should be able to send to D, but it will not. It will abstain from the transmission because of the carrier sensing. So what we're trying to say here is that carrier sensing for the case of wireless is very tricky. And it does not eliminate the collision. And in fact, in many cases, mistakenly, it wastes some opportunity for transmission because of the exposed terminal problem. Okay? برضه مش مستريح، حاسس ان انت مش مستريح كده.
الأفكار دخلت في بعض.
ماشي
So the exposed terminal problem focuses on the idea that it will not be able to send.
Right. It will not. بالظبط. It abstain from sending mistakenly, even though it should be able to send.
And the hidden terminal.
Hidden terminal problem talks about the fact that the carrier sensing does not actually avoid the collision from happening. واضح الفرق بين الاثنين؟ طيب. Another motivation بقى اللي هو ايه near far effect. We talked about this near and far terminals, right? So if B and A are trying to send to C, right? So in that case, B sending to C with lower transmission power, right? Whereas A, if it tries to send to C with the same transmission power, then there will be very high interference. And even if we're using different codes here, right, we have also the near-far effect, right? So that's why we said that A, even if it uses some multi-axis technique like code division, مثلا multiplexing أو حاجة, it should actually adapt its power. So that if A is sending with a power P transmission, A, and B is sending with P transmission, B, then the received transmission for A and the received transmission for B should be equal. And in order for us to achieve this, we have to make the transmission power for A higher than the transmission power of B, which means that because of the transmission of B to C, A will have to starve and it decays its energy very fast, right? So in this particular scenario, the effect of wireless forces the nodes to spend more energy in order to have a successful transmission, in which case it decreases its energy. ماشي كده؟ This scenario, by the way, happens a lot, يعني even in wireless, assuming that C is what we call arbitrator or coordinator node or our access point or a base station. In all cases, this scenario happens a lot. In cellular network, it happens. In Wi-Fi, even it happens, right? Where you have access point and you have some users close to the access point and you have some users far from the access point. So you need to have some multi-access techniques. If the two users are sending, مثلا using different frequencies, then the problem is less severe, right? They can send with the same transmission power as long as the access point is in the transmission range. So there is no interference. But if we're using some kind of multi-access techniques like code division multiplexing or something, in that case, it becomes an issue, and we have to adapt a power, in which case A will drain its power much faster than B. So because of this, so this is the motivation there. So I hope with the previous scenarios, now you appreciate the fact that in wireless, we need different multi-access techniques. Some of the multi-access techniques can still be used to some extent, assuming or if we achieve multi-access technique with no collision, because it looks like detecting collision in wireless is very tricky, okay? And even multi-access, even carrier sensing cannot really solve problems, okay? So in order to get rid of all of this, okay, so let's try collision-free. So collision-free techniques can still be used, right? So if we use collision-free techniques such as space division multiple access. So in space division multiple access, if we have like some wireless nodes like this, okay, we can have one node sending to one node and one node sending to one node, right? Using a space division multi-access. By space division multi-access, we can use, in that case, we have to use a directional antenna or sectorized antenna or something like this. And in that case, it will not be, the transmission range will not be a circle in that case. It will be like a cone. So if we direct this cone towards certain direction, we can use this concept to avoid collision between the concurrent transmissions. So this is called space division multi-access. واضحة دي؟ So that's the first thing. Another thing طبعا اللي هو TDMA. So we can still use TDMA similar to wired networks. We can use TDMA, right? And we talked about the fact that TDMA has some issues when it comes to what is the disadvantage for TDMA? Remember, or what is the يعني one of the issues for TDMA?
There is nothing to send.
صح مظبوط. Okay, so that actually lowers the total throughput. صح. If there is nothing to send, if I assign time slot to a node and the node doesn't have anything to send, this means that this time slot is actually wasted. So that's one issue, right? The good thing about TDMA is that it's simple, right? And it eliminates collision. There's no collision, right? But the issue here is that if I assign a time slot to a node and the node does not have anything to send, this slot will be wasted. What else? We talked about another issue.
Low number of slots.
Hmm?
Low number of slots.
ايه؟
Low number of slots. Yeah, time slots.
No, I can divide the channel into slots with whatever number I need. I have the complete freedom. There's no issue. يعني.
Consume other frequencies.
ايه؟
Other frequencies.
لا, here TDMA there's no frequencies.
Coordination.
الcoordination in what sense بقى؟
Synchronize.
أيوة, synchronization, right? Synchronization, because we said that for TDMA, the issue is that like when we have to synchronize the time slots, and these time slots have to be synchronized between some separate nodes, and each node uses a clock, right? So if we say that slot number 2 مثلا starts at time t, what is this t what is this t given the clock of each node? So each node has like slightly different time. There is a time drift between the clocks. So the absolute time calculated at each node is slightly different, right? So one node can start here and another node can start here and another node can start here. So we need very high coordination or synchronization between all these nodes, right? But these nodes are separate. They are distributed. So how can we coordinate the time between them? So there are some synchronization techniques. There is no issue, but it's still an issue. We need to have synchronization. Otherwise, if a node starts the time slot at a different time, so the transmission might go to the other time slot and the collision will happen. We don't want this to happen, of course, right? Because this is collision free. So a big condition for TDMA is that there has to be some synchronization. تمام. For FDMA we don't have to have synchronization per se, but we have to have a transceiver that supports multiple frequencies, right? Because each frequency is assigned to a specific node. So a node will have to use, different nodes will have to use different frequencies, which means that each transceiver should be capable of transmitting at different frequencies. So maybe at some point I assign a frequency F1, maybe if I move to another location I get assigned F2, so the transceiver itself will be slightly more complicated because it has to support multiple frequencies. I don't have a synchronization issue here because FDMA, it uses completely different frequencies, so I don't have any synchronization issue. But the issue here is that, again, if I assign a frequency to a node and the node doesn't have anything to send at certain point at any time, then all these frequency resources is actually wasted during the time of no transmission. طبعا in 2G they use FDMA, but they use FDMA with dynamic assignment, right? So they call it slow hopping. Slow hopping معناه ايه؟ ان a node gets assigned a certain frequency at a specific time, but after a certain amount of time it might get assigned another frequency, right? So it's like I divide the resources of the network as frequency and time, right? So this frequency and time will be assigned to node X, okay? And node X after this can be assigned this frequency and this time, node X, okay? So I assign these frequencies and time, okay, based on some intelligence or some resource allocation or radio allocation techniques. We'll talk about radio allocation or resource allocation techniques. So this is called slow hopping. Slow hopping معناه ايه؟ The node may in fact move from using one frequency to using another frequency at different time. So what we do is that we have what we call a super frame, okay? So this frame is in fact divided into frequency and time, okay? And this super frame is divided into multiple channels of frequency and time slots. And then I assign each frequency and time to a particular node. After the super frame is finished, then I can reallocate these resources to the same nodes or to other nodes based on certain logic. Okay? So this is called slow hopping because here the node moves from one frequency to another relatively slow. There is the concept of fast hopping spread spectrum or frequency hopping spread spectrum. This is used not بقى for eliminating collision. This is usually used to mitigate interference, right? Yes, yes. So for frequency hopping spread spectrum, as we said before, the interference is actually frequency selective, right? So I can assign different frequencies to avoid collision, or I can assign different frequencies to make the interference balanced across all nodes. So a node may in fact change the frequency it uses for transmission, right? Not only to eliminate collision, but also to try to balance the effect of interference, right? Because if we leave the frequency assigned fixed all the time, right, you will not have the same throughput on all nodes. Even if the nodes have equal transmission opportunity and they all have data to send, you will not have the same throughput. Why? Why? if I assign different frequencies to the nodes, right, using FDMA, okay, and the nodes, they have data to transmit, okay? So in that case, you will not get the same throughput for all nodes, even though the nodes, they all have data to transmit, and they have different frequencies. But the frequency assignment is fixed. You will not get the same throughput. Why? Because the interference effect is different on each node, on each frequency, right? Because the interference is frequency selective. So some of the transmissions for nodes using certain frequency range might suffer from higher level of interference, in which case some of the transmissions might fail because of the interference. Yani the probability of error is high, okay? So in order to make the interference effect sort of balanced across all nodes, what we do is that we may actually use hopping. And that's what we use in Bluetooth. They use frequency hopping spectrum so that they mitigate or they balance out the effect of interference. So since interference is frequency selective, we guarantee that each node can use all the frequencies, okay, using certain distribution. So the average throughput across all frequencies will be similar, right? So if the node changes the frequencies using some hopping sequence, we also balance out the effect of interference. واضح؟
How fast is
أيوة.
the fast frequency?
Usually in the level of milliseconds.
It has to be this fast to
Yes.
not to sense the
Yes. Usually the slow hopping is in the range of seconds. Usually the super frame is in the range مثلا 500 millisecond to 1 second مثلا. The super frame is relatively big, right? طيب. Essentially what we're trying to do here in the statement ديت, what we're trying to do is that we're using the multiplexing schemes for controlling the access to the medium. That's why now we're talking about multi-access, right? مش multiplexing, that multi-access, right? The transmission is happening from multiple nodes on a shared medium. One of the common examples here is that GSM. So what GSM uses is that GSM uses طبعا this is 900 megahertz GSM, which means that the center frequency or the carrier frequency is 900 megahertz. And then this 900 megahertz are divided using the concept of FDD, FDMA. And what this means is that first you actually divide the spectrum into two halves using FDD. ماشي؟ FDD stands for حد عارف؟ duplexing, frequency division, duplexing. Why? Because remember here we're trying to have full duplex transmission. Full duplex, by full duplex, you know full duplex? يعني you have transmission, concurrent transmission going in different directions. It's like a two-way street, right? Because a node might send and receive at the same time, right? So each node should send and receive, should be able to send and receive at the same time, right? So the transmission antenna is actually transmitting, but the receiver antenna is also receiving a signal at the same time, okay? And there is no conflict between the two. So in order also to have a full duplex, GSM uses a frequency division duplexing, which means that first it divides the spectrum into two halves. So here is what we call a downlink. And by downlink here, downlink. And by downlink here we mean this is the transmission from the base station down to the unit. Okay? And from 900 megahertz all the way to 890, okay? This is called the uplink. Okay? طيب. So each downlink and uplink here, we divide this half of the spectrum into 124 channels. ماشي? Which means that at one point of time, I can have at most 124 nodes assigned to these channels, which means 124 nodes transmitting at the same time. ماشي؟ On different frequencies. واضح؟ طبعا احنا we then divide this, يعني we create the concept of a super frame, and the super frame, as I said, relatively is like مثلا it reaches sometimes like 10 seconds. So for 10 seconds I can do this assignment. After 10 seconds, then I can reassign this. So I have 124 uplink and 124 downlink channels. I can reassign them to different nodes in that case. So we have a super frame, and we do this every super frame. واضح كده؟ عشان كده we call it slow hopping. تمام كده؟ Any questions? Any questions? تمام. طيب. Another standards that uses a different scheme or a TDMA scheme is DICT. We talked about DICT as the standard for cordless phones. يعني it's sort of outdated now, but DICT بقى uses بقى, unlike GSM, DICT uses a TDD TDMA. So in that case, it does the same thing, but in the time domain. So first, in the time domain, the super frame is also is big, and it divides this super frame back into first two big slots, or two subframes, let's say. So these two subframes, this is one subframe and this is one subframe, right? And each subframe is now is divided into 12 different slots برضو, مش channels بقى. 12 different slots. And each slot can be assigned to one of the cordless phones around, right? So this is uplink for uplink and downlink, and that's a TDD TDMA, right? So that's another multi-access technique used as part of DICT. طيب. So this is the collision-free schemes. So in collision-free schemes, we talked about SDMA, or space division multi-access. We talked about FDMA, frequency division multi-access, and we talked about TDMA. And we talked about TDMA, which is assigned dynamically. Example of this is GSM, okay? And we talked about also a FDD and TDD, or frequency division duplexing and time division duplexing. Type. So the idea of all these techniques was to eliminate collision altogether, right? But there is one big issue in all these schemes, which means that you can try to allocate, or especially if you're talking about fixed assignment, if you assign resources to a node, or to group of nodes in a fixed way, right? Chances are, if these nodes do not have anything to send, all these resources are wasted, and that's a big issue. Okay, so collision-based techniques, they try to be more aggressive, and يعني they started to talk about collision-based techniques for data transmission. What happened is that there are two schools for cellular communication. Cellular communication originally was actually designed to support voice calls. So when it comes to voice calls, we need some quality of service guarantees. And we can achieve this by having اللي هو بيسموه circuit switching. If you have a dedicated circuit, right? If you have a dedicated circuit, then the quality of service will be guaranteed. You will not have any voice disruption, right? Even if you're talking about video transmission, you will not have any video disruption. So the common thing for quality of service guarantees is to use a circuit switching. And circuit switching here indicates that you have dedicated resources for a huge period of time dedicated to you, even if you're not using them. Collision-free techniques, they achieve this. So if you're using TDMA or FDMA, assuming, of course, that you have synchronization and you can design the transceivers appropriately, right? You have a deterministic behavior. Okay? It doesn't happen that you transmit and then you have collision and the performance is varying a lot. So in that case, the performance can be guaranteed. So that's why in cellular communication, the school of thought was to use collision-free techniques, right? So that's why they use TDMA and FDMA and SDMA and all of this. And they tried to mitigate the fixed assignment and wasting resources by having the concept of super frame and slow hopping and all of this, right? But the school of thought was the fact that we need to eliminate collision so that we can guarantee the quality of service. Another school of thought was اللي هم الناس بقى بتوع الواي فاي اللي هو 802.11. These people they wanted to be more transmission aggressive because they need to support data transmission, not voice. And data transmission, you can in fact have good performance with collision, because with collision you can be more aggressive in getting transmission opportunities. But when the collision happens, I will deal with it by retransmission. And for data transmission, it's fine. It's fine. We're not talking about voice in that case. We're not talking about real-time multimedia data. So in which case, the data, what we care about is the reliability. And reliability can be achieved by retransmission. So if the collision happens, I will retransmit. So I will guarantee that, طبعا of course, using TCP. TCP can retransmit. So the idea is that by accommodating collision, I can be more aggressive in sending more data to the channel, right? So instead of assigning the same resource to one node, لا. Okay. يعني n nodes will be assigned the same slot based on the fact that on average, I assume that one node will be transmitting at the same, or I'm hoping that one node will transmit and use that time slot at any point of time. Because if I say all of you do not send and this node will be the only one accessing the medium, then there is a chance that this slot will be wasted. Okay? So that was the motivation behind the collision-based schemes, is to try to be more aggressive and eliminate any kind of a chance to transmit and you don't transmit, right? And that's particularly good for data transmission, right? طبعا the other school of thought, they try to increase the throughput using some kind of hopping techniques and so on and so forth. And also here, as we will see, برضو this school of thought, they try to increase the throughput by controlling the collision. Okay, it's like we are converging, yani. Okay, so this school of thought, they try to increase the throughput, and this school of thought, they try to control the collision, برضو to increase the throughput. طيب, so collision-based techniques here, they use the concept of random access بقى. So random access here, it makes the performance probabilistic. يعني it's not deterministic anymore. Here we'll have to use the probabilities بقى, distributions and so on. طيب. So by doing this command, there is a benefit that since we allow all the n nodes to send at the same time, and if there is collision, I will deal with it, right? So this means that the coordination between this node is not needed anymore. right? I don't need to have an arbitrator or a central node to say, you send at this time, you send at this time, you send at this time. Okay? In cellular network, for TDMA, if the assignment of the slots is fixed, I also need no arbitrator, right? Because it's fixed, right? But of course, in practice, we cannot make it fixed and waste resources, so we make it a little bit dynamic, in which case بقى I need a arbitrator. So in GSM مثلا, we assign frequencies dynamically, right, at different time slots. In that case, we need arbitrator. طيب, here, if we have no arbitrator, then we allow the nodes to send using certain logic. We'll talk about it. And then if there is any collision, I will deal with it. Okay? But the question is, we said a few minutes ago that we cannot really detect collision. How do you deal with something that you cannot even detect? Actually, that's a question. So let's see how we deal with that. So the most common or the simplest way of collision-based techniques اللي هو الألوها and slotted ألوها. In ألوها, this is ألوها يعني is actually named after the scientist who actually devised this or designed this. So ألوها here talks about the fact that if you have multiple nodes accessing a shared medium, okay, we will allow all the nodes to transmit at any point of time on the shared medium. As simple as that. It's the simplest, which means there's no control whatsoever. ماشي? So if node A has data to send at this point, it should try to send immediately. So whenever the node has any data coming from the upper layer, it should send on the medium. As simple as that. There's no control, nothing. Okay? So if there is overlap between the transmissions, that's what we call a collision. If two or more nodes, they have overlap in the transmission, then that's what we call a collision. In which case, all these frames, they will be wasted, right? Wasted, not lost. خد بالك لأن يعني when we say wasted ده معناها إن all this time on the channel is not used successfully, right? But this data is not lost. We can still retransmit this data from the from upper layer. Remember, we have TCP in the upper layer. ماشي? If we have TCP in the upper layer and these frames are not sent at this point, it will be retransmitted later. We don't have to worry about this. Okay, and hopefully next time when we retransmit, the collision will not happen and we have the transmission successful. So this is the simplest way. Remember, this is asynchronous transmission, which means that it's not synchronized at any time, at any time slot, or at any specific time, right? If you have data to send, just send immediately. You don't have to worry about anything, right? And if there is any collision, we deal with it. So the answer is that how can we detect collision? يعني how can we detect that these frames have not been sent successfully? We said we cannot detect collision, but can we in fact يعني realize, or can we in fact check that these frames have not been received successfully?
After receiving, yes.
اللي هو ايه after receiving ايه؟
Checksum.
لا التشيك سم is at the receiver.
We can wait for the
Acknowledgement, bravo عليك. Yes, right. So these frames, when they are sent, okay, we'll have to wait for acknowledgement from the receiver. If the receiver sends us positive acknowledgement, then we assume. So of course, for these frames, there is none of the receivers will be able to receive any of these frames. صح? We agree on this because these are signals on the transmission medium which are superimposed on each other. So when I try to detect and extract one from the other, I will not be able to. So this will result in an error at the receiver, right? So the receiver cannot extract one signal from the other. So the receiver either will not send any acknowledgement or will send negative acknowledgement. In both cases, whether بقى this negative acknowledgement is coming because of a collision or becoming because of interference, I don't care. I don't really to know the reason. All I need to know is that these frames have not reached to the receiver successfully. But I cannot figure out whether this is because of a collision, interference, error, whatever. I don't know. Hardware problem. I don't know. اتفضل.
Does collision also suffer from the same issues when they
I cannot separate the reason for not receiving this successfully. I cannot separate that reason for wireless. For wired, I can.
If the receiver receives the signal, but then it sends an acknowledgement and a collision happens, for example.
A collision happens for the acknowledgement. Yes, this is a good point. That's a very good point. We assume that the probability of collision for the acknowledgement is much less. Why? Because the acknowledgement is a very, very small frame that gets sent from the receiver to the transmitter. So the probability of collision for the acknowledgement is much less. Okay? But here, for simplicity of the analysis, we assume that, it doesn't happen. And this is a fair assumption in that case. Because really, in reality, it's a very small frame, and usually it doesn't happen. So here, we talk about collision because these are large frames. So the probability of having any overlap between them will be very high. تفضل. عندك question?
So we can have time on side.
Yes. Of course. Yes. ما أنا قلت either by not receiving an acknowledgement اللي هو time out or receiving negative acknowledgement. Negative acknowledgement happens when if the receiver tries to receive something and it says that, okay, what I received seems to be something, but I cannot receive it successfully because there is overlap between two frames or more, and I cannot really extract one from the other, right? So there is some error happening. So it sends negative acknowledgement. In both cases, for me, regardless of the reason, right, the frame was not received successfully. So I will declare that all these frames have not been sent. So each node will say, okay, so this frame has not been sent, and then it sends an error, and then TCP will have to retransmit, or something might happen in a later stage. طيب اتفضل.
In terms of utilization, how is this better than the other methods?
Because this is more aggressive. Because now if you have slots like this, so imagine if you have a slot like this is TDMA, and then you say one node should send in this time slot. Okay, so if you have many nodes having less amount of data to send, right? So in that case, many slots will be wasted, صح? But here I say that in this time slot, any node can send, صح? So if a node, we'll talk about in a few minutes, if a node has a probability P to send, ماشي? So the probability of any node sending on the medium will be multiplied by n, صح? If you have n nodes and each one has probability P, if I say what is the probability of having any node sending, then the probability will be multiplied by n, صح? So there will be high probability that any node can send. But if two or more are sending, this is the problem. If two or more are sending, the collision will happen. So collision-based techniques tries to be aggressive in accessing the medium.
So utilize as much as possible.
Utilize as much as possible, as long as we have data to send. ماشي? So we'll talk about how we'll analyze the throughput حتى mathematically in a few minutes ما تقلقش. Okay. طيب slotted قالوها بقى says لا احنا will not give complete freedom, we'll give near complete freedom in the sense that we will also divide the channel into slots, but the difference here is that will not make any slot assignment بقى خالص. If a node has data to send, in any slot it can send, right? So the only restriction here that I'm adding is that if node A has data to send here, okay, it should really wait for the beginning of the time slot to send. It cannot just send right away. يعني معناها the transmission here is not asynchronous. It's actually synchronized at specific time slots. This is the only difference. ماشي? Why do we have this slotted ALUA? Because it turns out by having these slots, you can actually reduce the probability of collision. You can reduce the probability of collision. And we'll analyze it mathematically and we'll see why is this happening. Eh?
Like in my mind, I think it's not. It increased the opportunity of collision.
هنشوف بقى ماشي ما هو انت اهو انا هو انت اهو خلينا نشوف ماشي خلينا نشوف نانلايز mathematically ونشوف اتفضل.
But this is too perfect, like that will say that the data will accumulate, will occupy exactly 2 terms.
Yes, ما هو صح. This is a good point. So this assumes that these frames has equal size, right? It implicitly assumes that the frames have equal size. And this is restrictive. I can argue, no, it's not. Why? Because if I have a big frame, okay, I can divide it into equal size frame and I can segmentation. I can use segmentation or fragmentation or something like this. So it's easy. And so I can deal with this easily. There's no issue. ماشي? Any questions? طيب. Yes, so this answers again your question. So all frames have equal size. طبعا time is divided into equal size slots, and of course if I have a bigger frame I can divide it into fixed size slots. Node starts to transmit only at a specific time slot, at the beginning of the time slot. So even if it has data. Okay. خلاص بس اقول الكلمتين او خلاص خلينا نبوز مش مشكله. طيب so قلنا ايه في السلوتد قالوها all frames should have equal size where nodes start to transmit at the beginning of a specific time slot when nodes are synchronized. يعني برضو there is one issue here with slotted ALUHA which does not exist in ALUHA. In slotted ALUHA the slotted concept that needs synchronization, but same thing just like TDMA. Okay, and if two nodes are transmitting at the same time, all nodes detect collision. طبعا detect هنا detect implicitly, not explicitly. Implicitly معناها ايه? By not receiving an acknowledgement or receiving a negative acknowledgement. Okay. When node obtains a fresh frame, معناها fresh frame منين بقى? From the higher layer. So it transmits in the next slot. So even if I have data now, I have to wait for the beginning of the next time slot. Okay? That's all I need to do, and then send. على طول. تمام? If no collision, then node can send new next frame in the next slot, and so on. If collision happens, again, detection is not explicit here; it's implicit. Then node retransmits. Retransmission here, it depends on the اللي هو the protocol you are using for the error recovery. So in many cases we use acknowledgement. If there is acknowledgement or negative acknowledgement, based on that we detect that there is an error. Error because of collision or error because of anything else, we don't know. But in all kinds of in all types of error, I need to retransmit. So the retransmission in many cases happens at the data link layer, and sometimes we put a limit. If you remember in network 2, we put a limit of three trials or something, and if I send again an error happens, then I consider that this frame is failed. That doesn't mean that it's lost, because again, TCP will retransmit and will try 3 more times and so on. So if you're using TCP, then you have 100% reliability. But the problem with 100% reliability is that it's bad in many ways because it causes delays. In all cases, يعني this is how the slotted ALUHA works. So So for the slotted Aloha, there is single active node can continuously transmit at full rate of the channel. If there are two nodes, then it's a problem. And it's highly decentralized in the sense that I don't need any arbitrator in that case. All I need is just synchronization. And we know how to do synchronization in a decentralized way. There are some approaches to do this. Even with the clock drift and everything, we know how to do this. But I don't have to have an arbitrator to dictate who will send in this slot. Okay, anyone can send in any slot. Okay, so in that case, it's very simple and it's very aggressive in accessing the channel. So chances are I can have a higher throughput. Okay, assuming that collision will not happen as often. So we'll see the condition for this. If there is collision بقى, then we are wasting the slots. فبرضه احنا we're trying to be more aggressive so that we don't waste the slots, but collision actually wastes the slots. So there are برضه يعني ايه if no node is sending at any time slot, برضه this slot will be wasted. So maybe in one slot there are two nodes are trying to send at the same time and there is collision happening. But in fact, if I'm smart, I will just tell one of these nodes to send in the next time slot, in which case, خلاص, I avoided collision. But unfortunately, in these types of schemes, I cannot do this. Okay? So I have two consecutive slots which are wasted. One because of the collision, and the other one because there's no node sending. Okay? So in that case, I wasted two consecutive time slots. ماشي? Nodes may be able to detect collision in less than the time of the transmitted packets, and as we said before, when a node transmits the packet, it may actually sense the carrier at the same time while it's transmitting. Okay, so there are certain conditions that a node may in fact, while it's transmitting, okay, it may in fact sense that there is transmission happening. Okay, so before ending the transmission, in some cases in wireless, it actually stops the transmission because it feels that there is something going on the channel. Okay, so it doesn't even complete the transmission of the packet. So while it's transmitting the packet, it senses that there is something on the channel. Whether this is by a collision or this is one transmission, two transmissions, whatever. Okay, so in many cases, nodes may, in fact, this happens in special cases. While the node is transmitting, it actually senses the channel at the same time. And if there is some power level which is higher than the noise level, sometimes it stops the transmission. Okay, so in certain cases that actually happens. And in slotted Aloha, of course, we talked about clock synchronization, which is tricky, but it's doable, even in a distributed way. Type. So now we want to analyze mathematically the performance of slotted Aloha efficiency. So we know that we have طبعا the probability of node sending, one node يعني sending is equal to P. Okay, so what is the probability of exactly one node sends on time slot I? On any time slot I have exactly one node transmitting. Okay, this means that one node is transmitting, okay, while the other nodes are not transmitting. صح? What is this? اللي هو ايه؟ 1 minus P. Okay, all the other nodes are not transmitting, and all the other nodes are not transmitting. صح? Which means it's a to the power n minus 1. So if I have n nodes, صح? So exactly one node is sending and all the others are not transmitting. Okay, طيب. So this is the طيب. What is the probability of any node بس node واحدة يعني sends at time I. Okay. So this is for one particular node. يعني node I is sending at time slot. يعني let's say node J is sending at time slot I. Okay. So this is the probability. What is the probability of any of the nodes is sending a slot I, but it's one node. Okay. This means that node 1 is sending while others are not sending, okay? Or node 2 is sending and others are not sending, صح? Or node 3 is sending and so on. So this is a summation of over all j, which means a n times p 1 minus p to the power n minus 1. صح كده؟ صح كده? Right? So this is the probability of any node, but this is one node only, is sending while other nodes are not sending. And type that's it. So what is this probability look like? If I say that, what is the total the total بقى throughput, or what is the maximum probability given the probability P? يعني how does B look like so that this probability will be the maximum? Okay, so this means that I need to take the derivative of this function, okay, and say it's equal to 0 and get the value P. صح كده? In order to get what is the maximum of this. Because this is actually the efficiency. يعني. This is the efficiency of the sorted ALU. Is when this probability is maximum. يعني this means I have, at any time slot, I have the maximum probability that one node only is sending and the others are not sending. صح? So this is the best case scenario, which means this is the maximum efficiency. So in fact, if I try to draw this against P, you will see that as the value of P is low, يعني the probability is very low of any node transmitting, it tries to take like some linear effect كده. ماشي? Which means that whatever you are sending is most probably successful. You're not getting any failures. So this happens when P is low. تمام? A good practical يعني scenario to really understand and visualize this is to look at مثلا Doha maybe 10 to 15 years ago. Doha was just full of roundabouts, صح? Why? Does that mean that the architect of the city was a bad guy? Actually, in fact, he was a very smart guy. Why? Because he knows that the population is low, right? So the load on the roundabouts is actually low. So the roundabouts actually represent a shared medium, right? Because it's an intersection. So people are coming from different places. So if he had done actually traffic lights as we have today, okay, well, this means that you will wait unnecessarily because the traffic is low anyway. So when we wait unnecessarily in traffic lights, we feel frustrated, صح? تمام? So in the past, we did not have to do this. So it's full of roundabouts, and we just go. We don't have to check anything, right? And it was faster. So in that case, throughput is actually faster. So if we try to schedule any kind of collision free mechanism, in fact, you will get something like this, lower throughput, because you will waste more slots, even though the traffic is actually low anyway, right? So this is the difference between مثلا حاجة زي TDMA and slotted ALUA. Because in here, in this region, ماشي, the probability of nodes, a specific node sending at a particular time slot for TDMA is very low, right? But in slotted ALUA, the probability is multiplied by n, but p is low, right? So the throughput is high. Is high because of n different nodes are contending on this time slot. So if node 1 is not sending, like node 2 had sent. If node 2 is not sending, node 3 had sent. So chances are somebody will send. تمام كده؟ طيب. The problem بقى إن هو إيه؟ This will grow, which might sound good, but at certain point we start to get something like this. Why? Because after certain limit, we start to have collision. Okay? And the more traffic load on the network, the higher the probability of the collision. Okay? And we start to have that the effect of collision dominates the transmission. TDMA, we expect something like this. Right? Because there's no collision. So of course there are some wasted slots. صح. تمام? But if P is increasing, okay, the wasted time slots will be less, and I will start to have most of the time slots filled. So the throughput will grow linearly with P. ماشي؟ مفهوم كده؟
So we went back to say that the previous methods are better than.
So the previous methods is good for high traffic loads. Okay? Yes. Slotted ALUA and ALUA is actually good when the load on the network is low. When the load on the network is low. Per node يعني. The load per node is low. ماشي كده؟ طيب what is this بقى? What is this value? Because it looks like it's maximized يعني at certain value of P. What is this? In order to get this, what we need to do is that we get the derivative of this and we equal 0, صح? يعني this is a convex function, تمام? We need to get the maximum, تمام? طيب يبقى إذن if we assume that this is F, okay, so let's just remove this. Remove this. Okay, yeah. Okay. طيب. So this is F. What is the derivative of F with respect to P? And we say it's equal 0. So what is this derivative بقى? This derivative is the derivative of this. طبعا n is common. This derivative is this is 1 and this is 1 minus P to the power n minus 1. Okay? لا مش time بقى plus. صح؟ plus اللي هو P times the derivative of this. The derivative of this is 1 minus P of the so n minus 1 صح؟ كده times 1 minus P to the n minus 2 تمام؟ and the derivative of the thing inside is minus. Okay? So this is equal to to 0, which means that I have 1 minus P to the power n minus 1 equals to P multiplied by n minus 1 multiplied by 1 Pn minus 2. Okay? تمام كده؟ So that will lead to the fact that طبعا this is very simple يعني. So this will lead to the fact that P will be 1 over n, which means that if I have the probability equals 1 over the number of nodes, then I will get the maximum efficiency. ماشي. After this, so if P is greater than 1 over N, the effect of the collision will start to dominate, which means that the throughput will start to decay. ماشي. So this essentially means that F equals to a, يعني just substitution بقى, equals to 1 minus 1 over N to the power N minus 1. صح كده؟ ماشي كده؟ طيب what is the efficiency as N goes to infinity? طبعا there is a proof, a mathematical proof, but in that case it's a little bit long. This will lead to the fact that the efficiency is 1 over E. 1 over E. Which means it's around 36% or 0.36. This is the efficiency as the number of nodes tend to be infinity. يعني. Okay, so this maximum efficiency is around 36%. تخيل بقى, which means that if you throw a traffic of slotted Aloha, the maximum you will get is the maximum you will get is 36% of that traffic. Okay? So that's the maximum efficiency. تمام. طيب, any question? By the way, خلينا نمسح ده. طب what is the probability of collision بقى؟ يعني هنا this is the probability of successful transmission. Okay? And we try to derive the efficiency.
Like we can decrease the collision by decreasing the width of the time, like slots. So when they said we can also decrease the collision, like increasing the time frame.
Increasing the time frame?
Decreasing slots.
Decreasing slots?
Yes.
Decreasing the time slots?
Yes.
ما هو this depends بقى on the transmission rate. It depends on so many things, but the efficiency this efficiency holds regardless of whatever size of the time slot that you have, because reducing the time slot will essentially mean reducing the frame size. So you will end up with the same efficiency. طبعا if you have a specific time slot, depending on the transmission rate and depending on P, ماشي, you can drive so many things. You can drive by the efficiency, you can drive the total throughput, and so on. But more importantly, what is the probability of collision here? The probability of collision, this is by the probability of collision. The probability of collision is actually the probability of having more than 2 or more transmissions happening. Okay, 2 or more transmission happening. ماشي? Which means 2 transmissions, 3 transmissions, 4 transmissions, all the way to n transmissions. Okay, so we can say this is the probability of having exactly 2 plus exactly 3 plus all the way to n. What is a simpler way of doing this?
1 minus
أيوة, برافو عليك. Yeah, which equals to 1 minus
probability of
the probability of having 1 transmission, which is the one that we just derived, which is equal to 1 minus np to the power 1 minus p n minus 1. يعني this is the probability of collision بقى, اللي هي ايه? The complement of having successful transmission. تمام كده؟ طيب let's go back. Yeah, so this efficiency is around 37%, اللي هي 0.36 or 0.37 exactly. ماشي كده؟ اللي هي 1 over E. طيب ده بقى يجاوب على السؤال اللي كان قبل كده. طيب what is بقى the same thing but in pure Aloha, not بقى slotted Aloha. The problem with pure Aloha بقى ان احنا كنا بنقول ايه, the probability يعني if we want to calculate the probability of having 1 successful transmission, this means that in a certain time, بس هنا بقى ما عندنا, we don't have time slot. Okay? In a certain time, we have one node is sending, while, ماشي, all the other nodes are not sending in the current time. Okay? But actually also all the previous nodes, okay, finish transmission in such a way that there is no overlap whatsoever. تمام? So هنا the source of collision happens from all the nodes that are trying to send while I'm transmitting, and all the nodes previous, okay, they finish transmission and there is no overlap. Okay? And it could be the same node, by the way. خد بالك. The same node was trying to send few seconds ago or few milliseconds ago. Okay? So the same node was trying to send and it did not finish the transmission, so it overlaps with my transmission. Or the same node finished transmission, it overlaps, okay, and then it started a new transmission. You see now, so the probability of collision is even more severe now. So we have 1 minus p to the power n minus 1 again, because the same nodes are trying to send in previous time slot or the current time slot. Of course, there's no time slot. Here, there is no time slot. But the fact that it's totally asynchronous makes one node can cause the collision, okay, twice. Or there are two different probabilities that the same node can cause the collision. واضحة دي؟ مش أنت مش مريحني مش عارف حاسس you're not. تمام؟ So in the previous.
The same end? The same end?
Yes, the same end. Yes, because it's the same node. خد بالك يعني this node, assume that this node is actually in fact the same node. This node might send here, okay, and then finish transmission and start sending again here. Both transmissions, they overlap with me. Okay? So all the nodes in previous time slot are not sending, and all the nodes in the current time slots are not beginning a new transmission. Again. And these are the same nodes. ماشي? So that's why I have to multiply by 1 minus p to the power n minus 1 again. Okay? So because of this, you will find that the maximum p here is actually 1 over 2n, and it will lead to the fact that the maximum efficiency is actually 1 over 2e in that case, which means that it's actually half the efficiency. So it's around 18% only. ماشي? This is the pure ALUA. So slotted ALUA, just by synchronizing these time slots, just by having these synchronized time slots, I was able to reduce the probability of collision by half, almost half.
Why would you use this one in this case?
Hmm?
Why would you use this one?
Because it's very simple. It does not require even synchronization.
But
By the way, it's being used. It's being used in satellite communication. So يعني old satellite communication schemes, they use ALUA.
until today.
Yes. And we'll talk about the fact that we will still use ALUA, but in a modified way. So even though ALUA, it looks very simple, and the probability of collision is high, ماشي, but we can still leverage ALUA in a modified way, in a different scheme. We'll see how now. So at least we know now how to analyze the performance of ALUA and slotted ALUA. طيب. So this is actually the derivation, as we have talked about it now, and that leads to the fact that the efficiency is around 18%. طيب ماشي. So which is worse than slotted ALUA. So how can we improve this? Again, this is still used in some old يعني satellite communication networks. So now, how can we try to combine the collision-based techniques with some reservation concepts in order to try to increase the efficiency. يعني إحنا what we're trying to say here is that إحنا we know the efficiency as a function of P is actually something like this, right? And then at some point we have a decayed efficiency. What we're trying to do, or what we're trying to achieve, is that can we in fact
Linear.
have something like this as much as possible? Okay? So this is what we're trying to achieve now. Which means that even in higher loads, we should try to reduce. خد بالك, we cannot eliminate. We cannot eliminate. بس احنا can we reduce the effect of collision as much as we can? Using بقى some reservation techniques. The only way to do this is, first of all, let's agree, we have to have an arbitrator. We have to have an arbitrator. ماشي? So let's agree on this. And this is what we call بقى demand assigned multiple axis. Demand assigned. So the demand assigned multiple axis here talks about the fact that we still use collision-based techniques, but we combine this with some reservation. ماشي? Let's see how. So channel efficiency, as we have achieved so far, 18% and 37% is very low. Reservation can increase the efficiency to 80%. تخيل بقى, which is good. So this room, how can we this room of improvement, how can we achieve this room of improvement? A sender reserves a future time slot. ماشي? So we reserve a future time slot, but we said that if this reservation is done يعني not in an optimized way, we might actually waste resources. But if we do the reservation, we minimize the effect of collision. ماشي? So now we're trying to address this trade-off. How can we do the reservation, but at the same time make sure that we're doing it for the right person, and this person indeed has something to send, and this person will not waste this resource. So in that case, if we do the reservation, in that case we can send without collision. We know this. So reservation also causes higher delays. Why? Because in order to manage this reservation, okay, we need to have some overhead. We need to have some overhead. And this overhead is because of the fact that in order for me to assign a specific time slot to a node and make sure that this node has data to send, then I have to first ask all the nodes, who has data to send? It's like you're coming to a meeting, and you have many people. Usually in a meeting, chances are 50% of the people are useless and they don't have anything to say. It happens to in many meetings. So in order for me to use the time efficiency in the meeting, okay, so once I start the meeting, type, before we start, who has something to say? Raise your hand. Okay, so I have something to send, I have something to send, I have something. Okay, you go first, you go second, you go third. So in that case, no collision, and I have optimized the use of resources or the time of the meeting. But I need to have this phase of really first asking who has something to say. صح? So this reservation phase always is a time overhead, is always wasted. But the good thing is that this reservation phase should be short. صح?
Are they happening simultaneously, like for example, the reservation is done at time, and then there is a node that is sending?
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly what happens. So I have some reservation phase first to ask nodes who has data to send. They will send me their requests. We'll see how now. Okay? And once they send me the requests, I say, okay, so amongst all the n nodes, only 3 nodes they want to send something. Okay, so I need to reserve 3 time slots only. For the n nodes, I need to only 3 time slots. Okay, so I will allocate, and you are telling me, Kaman, how much is the size of the frame that you want to send. So I can allocate a time slot exactly based on what you say. Okay, so I allocate this time for you, I allocate this time for the other guy, and so on. That's it. So we consider this one super frame, or one frame. Super frame to account for all the n nodes. And then after this, I will have to do the reservation phase again. So this reservation phase is always wasted. In TDMA and FDMA, we didn't have to do that, صح? Right? So this reservation phase is always wasted, and that's why it's a delay overhead. But we have to have this in order to eliminate collision, okay, and increase the efficiency.
It's not a delay if we, so because it's reservation at the end. So
صح we're using it for something useful مظبوط بس we didn't have to do that. And remember, who has to do this? The arbitrator, which means I have to have an arbitrator. Okay, in TDMA, if the assignment is fixed, we didn't have the arbitrator, right? And we didn't have to account for any reservation phase. ماشي? So these are pros and cons. ماشي كده؟ طيب. So typical some satellite communication it uses برضو these schemes. هنشوف بقى it uses actually a combination of aloha and reservation, both at the same time. We'll see how now. Type some examples for these reservations. We have explicit reservation schemes and implicit reservation schemes. What is the difference between the two? هنشوف. وفي another scheme called reservation TDMA. This is what the one that we just said. So the time slots can be allocated, but first based on some reservation phase at the beginning. Okay? So you tell me what you want to send, and then I will allocate to you exactly what you want. But this reservation phase has to always be there in every superframe. Okay? طيب, the first reservation phase is what we call, or the first DAMA scheme that combines the use of reservation with the collision-based techniques is what we call explicit reservation, which uses or in some cases they call it reservation aloha. Why do they call it reservation aloha بقى? Because the reservation phase uses the aloha scheme. Okay?
The reservation itself.
Yes, the reservation phase itself, okay? Because again, in the reservation phase, how would I organize برضو the reservation phase? Because you need to send me, not the frame in that case, but you need to send me what you want to send. Okay? So how are you going to also send me what you want to send? Because this is not it's not a frame, it's a mini frame. It's a small frame.
It's like the acknowledgement.
It does not have the data in that case, but it has information about what you want or what you intend to send at this point of time. واضح كده? So what happens is that we have this reservation phase, okay, that uses slotted aloha in that case, which means I don't need to have n different mini slots. لا, I have slots ماشي for a certain duration of time, and these slots n nodes can contend on these time slots. ماشي? So here in this reservation phase, n nodes will contend on these few mini slots, which means I might have collision. But the collision here is low probability. Why? Because here we're talking about many frames, not full frames. So the probability of overlap between them is low. ماشي? So these many frames, they contain information about the size, okay, of data that each node wants to send. If a node does not want to send anything, it doesn't have to contend. خلاص. It doesn't have to send anything. If I don't want to send anything, I don't have to send any many frame here. Which means that the probability of collision is really low. Only nodes that want to send data, they need to send a many frame containing the size of the frame they want to send. That's it.
But if less nodes are sending, doesn't this mean that utilization is very low?
No. Why بقى? Why? Because here, at this point, I know that only 3 nodes out of the n nodes they want to send. Not only that, I know exactly the size of the frame that they want to transmit. So here, what I need to do here in this phase, after the reservation phase, usually I use this time to announce. Okay? So the arbitrator will say, Okay, so now I need to announce node X will send in this time, node Y will send in this time, node Z will send in this time. That's it. Okay, so this time is actually the announcement time. So in that case, I eliminated collision completely. But I need to have this reservation phase. ماشي كده? So here, I will allocate only 3 time slots, and the super frame now is finished, and now I can start another frame. That's it. Okay? I don't need to allocate n time slots and waste. خلاص I know بقى يعني now I know who wants to send, so I allocated 3 time slots only. ماشي؟ خلاص كده super frame has finished. I can start another super frame. Oh, this is the reservation phase. Who wants to send, and so on.
So in this case, the reservation phase and the overhead are both considered like part of how utilization is not fully used in this case.
Of course. You will not have a utilization of 100%, never. You will not have a utilization of 100%. But definitely because of the reservation phase, you can reach levels of 80%, which is good. Compared to Aloha and slotted Aloha, of course, this is a big upgrade. ماشي, and that particularly happens in high traffic loads. In high traffic
We're
loads.
saying 80% for high traffic load.
Yes, لا هو 80% in all cases. يعني this is the maximum efficiency.
But of course, if we can prove it for the high traffic
Yes,
load.
yes. So if you have يعني huge amount of traffic loads, okay, you can get 80% of this. But remember, for the case of slotted Aloha, in high traffic loads, you get almost nothing. صح? So this behavior is really bad. But here, in high traffic loads, you are getting 80%. It's good. ماشي? So again, here, we're not eliminating completely the collision. Collision may still happen in the many slots, but very low probability. Very low probability, because only the nodes who have data, those are the ones who will send the many frames, right? They will contend on these time slots. So the probability of collision is really, really low. ماشي? But the overhead is there because of this reservation phase.
Does this mean that it's eliminated for the data in this case?
Yes, of course. Here, there's no collision. خلاص.
It will never happen.
That will never happen. And if collision happens here, what will happen? خلاص, this means you will not read the many frames. So you will not allow these nodes to send anyway. So the nodes will have to delay their transmission. خلاص. They are not lucky. But this probability is very low anyway.
Because of their size.
Yes, because of the small size. مفهوم? Any
This method uses pure Aloha.
slotted Aloha.
Slotted Aloha.
Slotted Aloha. هنا they use slotted Aloha. Okay. This is used in satellite systems. Used very commonly in satellite
This
systems.
makes sense to be used with satellite, but the pure Aloha.
لا pure Aloha طبعا لا. Yeah, pure Aloha لا. يعني we need to have some kind of slotted Aloha to again reduce يعني the effect of collision a little bit. طيب implicit Aloha خلينا نتكلم على دي وخلاص. This بقى implicit reservation, which means that we don't have explicit reservation phase. So what will happen is that we will divide the super frame into time slots similar to TDMA, but or similar خلينا نقول similar to slotted Aloha. Okay, similarly slotted Aloha. And here we will not initially assign any time slot to any node, which means that we are going to use slotted Aloha in this super frame. Okay, which means that nodes will contend on the time slots, right? So here, node A was able to send on this time slot successfully in the first super frame, right? So in that case, it's implicit that node A has reserved this time slot from now on. Okay? Node C was able to send, node D was able to send. Unfortunately here, there was a collision. If there was a collision, which means that there was no successful transmission here, so we declare this frame as it was not reserved. This is done by arbitrator برضه خد بالك. هنا في arbitrator برضه. We have arbitrator here. Okay? So if a node was successfully able to transmit on a time slot, we declare, the arbitrator will declare here that this time slot is reserved for A until A has nothing to send. Okay? So why do we do this? To get rid of the reservation phase. There is no reservation phase here.
Seems like it has a lot of things to say.
Yeah, yes. So A has lots to say.
No, in one.
C has 2 frames, but then it doesn't have anything to send.
Not only the frame, but also it took it 4 and 6.
4 and 6.
A.
A. Yeah, no, A took all of them.
No, not the frame in the time slot itself. So going to 4 and 6. The-
Go-
The different
framework.
frame, different frame.
Yes. In the same super frame, yes. Because we contend بقى خلاص, we have complete freedom. So here, A will send here, A will send here, A will send here. صح. A was very يعني aggressive and transmitting, so A was able to reserve 3 time slots in one super frame. That's possible. Okay? And C has reserved this time slot. If a collision happens, node was not lucky, so this frame will still be available for contention. So here, at the end here, the arbitrator will announce, okay? Only A can send here, only C can send here, only A can send here, and so on. This one is still available. Okay? So from there on, there will be no collision on the time slots that have been reserved. So there should be no collision here, no collision here, no collision here, no collision here, okay? Only here, I may have transmission, I may have collision. So only this is the one that will be available for contention. واضح كده؟ But all the other frames, they should have no collision whatsoever.
But the overhead for announcing who.
Of course. لا overhead هنا announcement. This is one frame announcement يعني. We did not account for this in the reservation based قالوها أصلا. ماشي؟ This is one beacon كده بس سنته خلاص. ماشي؟ It's negligible يعني. D here stopped transmitting. So this slot will be wasted, right? But it will be an indication for the arbitrator that this time slot has become available for contention. Okay? So here I will announce that this time slot and this time slot and this time slot are available now for contention. And the other time slots, not available. واضح كده؟ So this is implicit reservation. Implicit reservation means that if a node sends successfully, I will implicitly assign this time slot to this node as long as it has anything to send. Until it tells me otherwise. ماشي? It tells me otherwise by not transmitting. Once it does not send anything in that time slot, okay, so I will get this time slot and I will put it in the pool of available time slots for contention. اتفضل.
But how many frames do you need to decide for all?
لا frames can go forever مش مشكلة. This is super frame. ماشي super frame يعني this is time goes on for infinity يعني ماشي. So it does. So this logic is done per super frame. I can have that 8 time slots or whatever. ماشي. I eliminated the explicit reservation phase in that case. ماشي. And I'm doing it implicitly. But because of this, remember there are some wasted time slots. صح? Because I need to have this wasted time slot in order to declare that this time slot is available in the pool of available time slots. But I'm wasting some time slots. Why have collision? I did not eliminate collision. Similar to الريزرفيشن قالوها. I did not eliminate the collision 100%. ماشي. Here I also cannot eliminate the collision because the available pool of available time slots, they use again contention. واضح؟ But from one super frame to another, the pool of available time slots for contention, it varies بقى. It varies based on this implicit reservation scheme. ماشي؟ Any questions? This is the implicit.
What is the efficiency of throughput in this case?
حلو. You will do it in assignment 2. Or in another word, I can bring it to you in the exam and ask you to calculate the efficiency. يلا. Okay. But yeah, definitely طبعا it's above slotted ألوها in terms of efficiency. But is it equal to reservation ألوها? We don't know. We have to analyze that.
And the explicit
The explicit reservation might have a throughput comparable to this. We don't know. In some cases, it might be higher, lower. We'll see. And that, of course, also depends on the traffic load and many things. ماشي كده؟ خلاص, we'll stop here. This third one we'll talk about it next time, inshallah.